40 years ago today, Soviet tanks invaded Czechoslovakia to crush a brief experiment in liberty that came to be known as the Prague Spring. Like its neighbors in Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia was a communist country and a member of the Warsaw Pact, not by choice, but because it lay in the part of Europe that was occupied by Soviet forces after World War II. Then, for 8 months in 1968, its people rebelled against 20 years of repression. Their message was clear: we have as much a right as anyone to live and speak and choose our government freely. We should not have to bend to the will of others simply because we happen to be on the wrong side of an arbitrary line. The United States did not do much to help Czechoslovakia when the Soviet tanks rolled in back in 1968, but we have done much since then to help build a Europe where no nation need fear what the Czechs and Slovaks endured 40 years ago. We brought the Cold War to a successful conclusion. We helped new democracies from the Czech Republic to Estonia to Bulgaria to stand on their feet and to find lasting security as members of NATO. We ended atrocities and civil war in the Balkans. And we reached out to Russia, offering it partnership as it traveled its own hard road to stability and, we hoped, to democracy. With old allies and new, we helped advance the dream of a Europe in which every nation is free and every free nation is our partner. Now, as we have watched Russian tanks and troops invade and occupy Georgia, we have been reminded of all the painful history that Americans and Europeans have been working so hard to overcome. Many are now wondering if the old patterns of aggression and subjugation that defined Europe for so much of the 20th century have returned here in the 21st. Let me be clear. Those dark days must not return. Georgia and all the nations of Europe must have the right to live freely and securely within their borders, a right that was so tragically denied the Czechs and Slovaks in 1968. It is important to remember that Russia today is not the Soviet Union of the Cold War. There is no nuclear standoff between East and West, no Fulda Gap, no Berlin Wall or Warsaw Pact. The United States and Russia have common interests in stemming nuclear proliferation, combating terrorism, and preserving the environment. We have a stake in working with Russia to advance those interests. And Russia, with its proximity to Iran and North Korea and its unsecured nuclear facilities and material, has at least as great a stake in working with us. No one would benefit from a return to the Cold War. Russia is not threatened by independent, democratic countries on its borders, and the Russian people want a secure, free, and prosperous future just like we do. At the same time, we must be clear in standing up for our values. While brave people inside Russia struggle for human rights and the rule of law, Russia is moving away from democracy. It still appears to define its greatness in opposition to others. It still seems to think that its stability and strength depend on keeping its neighbors unstable and weak, and that it is better to be feared than to be respected. Such thinking has no place in our young century. America has an enduring interest in a peaceful, democratic, undivided Europe. We are not going back to a Europe of spheres of influence in which small countries must bend to the will of a powerful neighbor. There must be no more captive nations. Every nation in Europe should be able to choose its leaders, its alliances, and its destiny. That goes for nations like the Czech Republic, which is in the center of Europe, and nations like Ukraine and Georgia, which happen to be in its eastern half. 40 years ago, these rights were denied to a small country whose people sought only to assert their sovereignty and freedom. Today, we remember their courage. And today, we must honor their legacy by standing up for the sovereignty and freedom of all nations and all people.